Hi, thanks for joining us as we take our remotely interesting video series on the road. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Winnie Palmer. Winnie is the EMEA CMO for lorry client Seismic Software. She spent over 20 years in B2B tech, previously running marketing and digital for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise in EMEA, amongst other things. And she's a frequent public speaker, passionate evangelist for meaningful digital transformation. And she also serves as an independent governor at the University of Greenwich. So really excited to have you here today, Winnie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Oh,
it's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's going to be good fun. We've got a few minutes and we're going to talk through some of the research that we've been given access to from Vanson Bourne. So I was just going to recap a couple of the data points and then we'll get started discussing it. Vanson Bourne are a B2B specialist, technology, a research focused company, and they've given us access to a recent study that explores how news consumption has changed in the US and the UK for IT decision makers. So some of the stats were really, really interesting, particular ones to pull out where the majority, I think it was about 51% of people who were surveyed actually said that they're now getting most of their news from social media, whether that's LinkedIn, Twitter, other platforms, and that's how they're accessing their up-to-date news and intel from their networks. They're also consuming a lot more video content. About 56% said that they're relying more on video content to get news. They're attending more organised webinars and online events. And around 35% of people said that they're actually looking for more access to data and market research. So some really interesting stats there about the way that consumption has changed. And Winnie, just wanted to kind of get your view on that. Were the findings, do they surprise you or would they be as you expect?
I find this research very, very interesting, and it resonates with the patterns we are seeing with our customers and our prospects. And this is not surprising at all, right? Partially because there's far less opportunities for in-person events and or for meetings. So much of the sales and marketing content, if you like, has to migrate online. So yeah, I think this totally resonate with what we are seeing, the increased usage of information on digital channels, especially social, and how the consumption of social media content have really intensified, but also across the board, right? The whole wide range of formats, including videos and webinars, etc. But I think there's a point there. There's a challenge, I think, around how we as readers or consumers navigate through the plethora of options with this explosion of content available, right? And find what we actually interested in and that's worth our time.
Yeah, there's just so much to I think that, and that's something that I was going to ask in terms of how have you then adjusted your PR and marketing strategy in light of the pandemic and all of these changes with sort of the influx of content that's out there?
I mean, in the purest form, the strategy itself hasn't changed. Marketing and PR in its purest form, we need to align our offer with the critical needs of our customers and identify and find a white space and position, right, relative to competition, and find the most effective way to communicate our value adds to our intended customers. That has not changed at all. Okay. But I think what has changed is more how we create that experience. And there are a couple of things there. I think, first thing is how we create the content that will resonate with the concerns of the audience, because the market's so volatile at the moment. So I think the point there is we just need to be a lot more nimble and responsive to the change in narratives in media in the marketplace. So before COVID, it's all around growth. If you remember the time, the good old days, we're talking about growth strategy, everybody. But now it's more around survivals, operational efficiency. So we need to find out, the best way to align our offering to what the salient concerns of business are today. And then you need to be able to follow that quite quickly. The speed to market is much more important, I think, than ever before.
Yeah, I think that. And anything else on that?
Yeah, I think there's a second point on what we just talked about from the research, right? So there's a huge amount of content they have to migrate online. So there's the basically a huge amount of competition for attention. And in that sense, our stories or any brands needs to think about this is how can you be so crisp in your narrative,
yeah, it's such a
and making sure that you deliver that consistent stories across channels, geographies, teams, and time zones. So you can cut through the clutter and more effectively. And then, so in that sense, you need to have, for me, I think operationally, I found that there's a heightened need for better content orchestration and consistent delivery of content, going deeper into the market while trying to maintain overall consistency. If I give you an example, I usually talk about the 80-20 rule. So you say like 80% is global and or standardized approach in terms of your processes and implementation. But at the same time, it's quite important, I think, to allow for maybe 20%, but sufficient amount of flexibility at the program level. So you enable your team to deliver more personalized experience that will resonate with your specific audience segment.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's that balance, isn't it, between building trust by being consistent, but not being so consistent that you seem almost robotic. It's having that flex to be able to be bespoke depending on who you're talking to or who you're trying to target. So yeah, I think that 80-20 rule is a really valuable one to kind of take forward. And I mean, on that then, considering, what would your advice be to sort of technology companies, other tech companies, about how to maybe adapt, given that news consumption has changed? What do you think that they need to do now?
That's a great question. We're all trying to do our best. One thing, there's people are thinking about this day in and day out. And from my perspective, what I found really useful, and then what we don't usually talk about, is to look at how we reach across aisles to sales. So from marketing, not just marketing communications, but reaching out to sales, to customer success, to services, so we can understand what's actually happening at the front line, what's resonating, what is not. So marketers, we would know what stories are being told, right, and whether they are resonating. And at the same time, we provide value back to our colleagues. And that is quite an important point, going back to the previous point, in terms of how we deliver crisp story. Right, you want to be able to make sure that your entire GTM team is executing consistent stories at scale, regardless where your customers might be in terms of their buyer journey. Right, and you can only do that by unifying your sales and marketing teams in terms of their content, and workflow, and processes together. And in that sense, that will help not only driving the sales performance, but also driving marketing performance, because we can then focus on creating the right content that delivers positive business outcome.
Yeah. So it's really driving that collaboration between those two functions, which should work so closely together, but often don't. So yeah, no, I think that's really valuable advice, and I think now is probably just more important than it's ever been to make sure that there's a bridge between those two parts of the business. So that's really great. We could talk about this all day, I'm sure, but thank you. That's been really, really helpful, and really appreciate you taking the time. And the video, all of the content will be available on our social media very soon. So check that out, and keep an eye on other platforms for our remotely interesting videos. Thanks very much, Winnie. And thanks to Vanson Bourne for giving us access to the data as well.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.